All right. Well, good evening. It's good to have each one of you here tonight as we dig into our Hebrew history, our study through, I say the Old Testament. You know, we started with Abraham because that's the beginning of Hebrew history. And we'll see either when we get tired of it or when events overtake us and we'll do something else at some point because by rights, we could go through most of the Old Testament as part of Hebrew history, and that takes a long time. There's actually an anecdote about that I love. So a lot of you know who John MacArthur is. He preaches very faithfully, very diligently, and one might almost say methodically. And so on the year when he'd been preaching in his church for 50 years, I think it was the year before that, he finished preaching through every verse in the New Testament. And so in Sunday morning services, he had preached through every single verse in the New Testament at various times, some more than once. But he made some comment as they were finishing up Luke's gospel. That was the last thing he had to do, was preach through Luke's gospel. And so he wraps it up, and on the Sunday when he did it, he commented that, you know, we've now studied through every verse in the New Testament. And bless her heart, one of the little old ladies in his church came up to him after service and asked if they were then starting the Old Testament. And so, you know, he's like 48, 49 years into this endeavor to preach through the whole New Testament. He says, I don't know, we're not going to make it all the way through, but we'll see what happens. And so you can go a long ways studying Hebrew history, studying in our Old Testament. But we're going to pick up tonight in Genesis chapter 27 where we left off. So we left Isaac and Rebekah. They had dealt with Abimelech and their time in Gerar. They've made peace with Abimelech. It's a little bit of an uneasy peace, but they've made peace with Abimelech. And the chapter closes kind of with a foretaste of things to come at the end of chapter 26, reminding us that when Esau was 40 years old, he took his 2 wives from the Hittites, and it was a grief to the minds of his parents. And so the chapter closes there and kind of leaves us anticipating more to come on this score. And so chapter 27 opens, and we find the incidents of Isaac blessing Jacob. He sets out to bless Esau, but he ends up blessing Jacob. So we're going to pick up tonight in Genesis 27, starting in verse 1. And we read in Scripture, and it says, Now it came to pass, when Isaac was old, and his eyes were so dim that he could not see, that he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, My son. And he answered him, Here I am. Then he said, Behold now, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now therefore, please take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and make me savory food such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul might bless you before you die. And so Larry? Sure. So in this context, the blessing would have been passing on, it's almost calling down what I wish for. And so we'll see this. Isaac does this for Jacob. Jacob will actually do it for his sons. And if you remember, there's actually a really interesting incident where Jacob gets to the end of his life, and he goes and sees Joseph and Joseph's sons in Egypt, and Joseph has part of that. And so these blessings, they are certainly to a certain extent inspired. They speak a lot of truth. Isaac very clearly, we're going to see when we get on a little bit here, believes that in passing along the blessing, he is passing along the promises that God has given to Abraham and to him. And he feels that he is designating who those flow to. We're going to find out that he doesn't have control over that process the way he thinks he does, but in his mind, that's what he's doing here. Steve? I don't know that I'd say so much as giving a charge as he he is seeking God's blessing for his children. This would be a prayer of what I wish for my children, what I desire for my children, those things that I want to pass along. And for the patriarchs here, there is certainly a sense of God has promised this incredible, the covenant between Abraham and God, and it was promised that it would pass along. And so there's a sense here that the patriarchs feel that they're handing that off to the next generation. Those promises of God, that incredible blessing that God had given Abraham, gets passed on to Isaac. We don't actually have a record of that blessing, but I don't think Isaac came up with this out of nowhere. And so he now sees himself as passing this on to the next generation. And it actually, because of the politics that have sprung up in their family, it causes quite a bit of strife. And so there's a couple of things to notice here as we begin. Chapter 27 jumps us somewhat forward in time. Esau is 40 years old when he marries his two wives at the end of chapter 26. We get to the end of chapter 27, and he's now probably 30 years down the road-ish. Isaac is at this point 137 years old. He's, as he calls himself, an old man. His eyes are failing him. We're going to see as we go through the account that he's to the point where he can't even distinguish between his two sons just to look at them. And so his eyesight is failing significantly. And he feels that his time is near. I mean, this whole incident is presupposed by this phrase here at the beginning of verse 2. He says, "Behold, now I am old. I do not know the day of my death." He feels like it's soon. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, we know it's not for another 43 years. He's going to die at the age of 160. So he still has quite a ways yet to go. But he's at a stage in life where Isaac feels like it could be any day now. And so he's ready to hand off the reins of leadership of the family to Esau. And he's ready to make that transition. He feels like the time is coming. It's not his season to be in leadership of the family anymore. And he wants to pass that along. And so he calls Esau to himself. And he tells him, "Look, I'm old. I don't know the day of my death." And so now, therefore, verse 3 really gives us this interesting glimpse into what's going on in Isaac's mind. "Now, therefore, please take your weapons and your quiver and your bow and go out into the field and hunt game for me and make me savory food, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." Now think about this for a second. Isaac's at the end of his life. He says, my last days are upon me. That's the way he feels. You know, every once in a while you wake up in the morning and you feel like your last days are upon you. Isaac's feeling that way more often than not. And he's concluded that the time's not that far off. And so he's ready to pass on the blessing, but rather than just calling Esau and passing on the blessing, he says, "Here, go make me that savory food that I love. Put me in a good mood. I want to have one last time where I'm just so grateful that you're my son and that you're able to do this for me, and then my soul will be able to bless you." Almost like there's a hurdle he's got to get over, and he's trying to get himself worked up to do it. I think in the back of his mind, he remembers the prophecy that God gave to Rebekah when those two boys were in the womb, when he told him, "The older will serve the younger, and the younger shall be the heir of the promises." And so he knows this. Certainly, this is at least 40 years later, probably more like 50 years after when Jacob and Esau had their exchange over the pottage, and Jacob bought Esau's birthright. And so Isaac knows that Jacob is now owner of the birthright and the one who deserves the promises, deserves the blessing, deserves to be the inheritor of all of the hopes and the wishes of the family that are about to pass on. And yet he's making a choice here to pass it on to Esau. All of these things, all of that's overlooked and ignored, and instead he sets his favor on Esau, and he asks Esau to go and make preparations for his favorite kind of meal and make everything just the way he likes it so that he can pass his blessing on to him. He's trying to work up an experience here. And I think that what follows is a sad commentary on the dangers, first and foremost, of ignoring God's revealed will. He knew what God's plan for this moment was. God had made it clear. And yet he struggles against that and out of that, and which is not to say that everybody else's choices are Isaac's fault. But once he sets that ball rolling, there are consequences to that. And there's all of this intermingling of politics and struggle and strife and deception that go on in the family. And so he bears some responsibility for that. Not only that, I would say it's a sad commentary on the dangers of parental favoritism. Isaac and Rebekah have for a long time here had their favorites in the family. And as this incident plays out, I think it's clear from the way that it plays out that this is not the first time that they've been willing to kind of work the edges of the deal and maneuvering the politics of the situation to try and get an advantage for their favored son in the situation. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. We see that play out not only in Jacob and Esau, but that's a generational problem because it's a pattern that ultimately Jacob learns, and it has consequences in Jacob's children's lives. And we see all of that play out between his 12 sons and all of the bitter strife and difficulty that go on in their lives. Now, God is ultimately able to use that. And Joseph gives us one of the greatest commentaries on the sovereignty of God and God's ability to use what we mean for evil for his own good purposes. But it causes a lot of strife and suffering and pain along the way. And finally, I would say it's a commentary on the dangers of just deceit and following this path of deception. Both of them are playing a game here where Isaac and Rebekah are seeking to hide the ball a little bit, kind of manipulate what's going on. Isaac is trying to make sure Esau gets the blessing, and he's kind of doing it surreptitiously in a way that isn't entirely out in the open and up. And Rebekah catches wind of it, and then she has a counter plot to make sure Jacob gets the blessing, and it just spirals out of control. Now, look on to verse 5 as we continue. So Isaac calls Esau in and sets the stage here by telling Esau he wants him to go hunting and find some of his favorite kind of game and prepare it the way he likes, and then he'll bless him. Verse 5, Scripture continues, and it says, "Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to Esau his son. And Esau went to the field to hunt game and to bring it. So Rebekah spoke to Jacob, her son, saying, 'Indeed, I heard your father speak to Esau, your brother, saying, Bring me game and make savory food for me, that I may eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice according to what I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me from there 2 choice kids of the goats, and I will make savory food from them for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall take it to your father, that he may eat it, that he may bless you before his death.'" Almost like some kind of game of chess here. Machiavelli would have been proud in this moment. Rebekah hears what's going on, and whether she shouldn't have been listening or not or is not entirely clear here, but she hears Isaac's plan. And rather than discussing it with Isaac, rather than seeking the Lord's face, rather than doing any of the many things she could have done, what's her first move? Deceit. She goes and finds Jacob, and no sooner does she find Jacob, she's got a plot in mind the moment she hears what's going on. And so she scurries off to find Jacob and says, "Hey, come here. I just overheard your father. He sent Esau out to the field, and he's going to go hunting. So here's what I want you to do. You're going to go get a couple of small kids of the goats, and you're going to bring them in, and I'll butcher them and prepare them just the way your father likes. And then you're going to take it in, and you're going to pretend to be Esau, and then you'll get the blessing instead of Esau." There's not a bit of this that's good. It's instructive here that Rebekah doesn't seek to speak to Jacob on the matter. And you can say a lot. There is something to be said for the fact of the culture and the times. Her opinion very possibly was not welcome in this situation. But the fact that there's not even an attempt made to find some means of dealing with this situation, no statement that she's putting her trust in the Lord and he's going to do what he's going to do, nothing. Her first thought is deception, makes me believe that this isn't the first time they've had an interaction like this. They've differed on issues before, and you've reached the point where we're not even fighting about it anymore. We're both just kind of maneuvering and trying to make sure we get the advantage we're looking for. So Isaac and Rebekah think it's very important, obviously. They go to great trouble to try and get the blessing. I would say that it's actually almost irrelevant because God has already said who he's going to carry on the line through. He's made that clear. The choice has been made, and God is promised he's going to carry on that Abrahamic blessing down through Abraham's descendants, and he said Jacob, the younger, is the son it's going to carry on through. So, well, I don't want to go as far as to say that there's nothing to this. This is not, Isaac and Rebekah are acting like this is some kind of magic. We're going to chant the right words and wave some incense, and we're going to make the thing happen that we want to happen. Is that how God works? Like some kind of cosmic vending machine, and if we just say the right things and do the right actions, we get the outcome we want? No, absolutely not. Oh, we try desperately. We want I never heard that before. Hold on. As someone with a bit of an engineering background and fixing things as part of my day-to-day life, I struggle with that. Something happens, I want, like, my first response is to start strategizing how I'm going to fix it. And for some problems, that's great. That's not always the right response, especially in spiritual matters. Larry? It's always instructive to me when we start a remodel project, my wife sees the end product that we're working towards. I look at a project, and again, my background, I see all the hurdles we have to get over. I'm looking at the problems. I'm looking at what could go wrong here. Well, we don't want to do that because that's going to cause this, and I get lost in the details and the mechanics of how, and she has this vision for what we're going to accomplish. Sometimes that means she gets a lot more done in the way of actually getting a project finished because she's willing to just dig in, and then once you're halfway in, you're going. Whereas I tend to kind of, it's Saturday, and I want to see that done, but I also know if I start that now, I'm going to be up till 9 o'clock tonight trying to finish it, and I don't feel like that. So that's another day's project sometimes. They're in their 60s at this point, I think. Isaac is 137. I think Esau and Jacob are in their 60s at this point. Yep, because before this, the end of chapter 26, Esau's 40 when he marries his two first wives, and some time seems to pass here. If you go back and you try and line the chronologies up, I think Isaac is about 137, which makes the boys in their 60s at this point. Yeah, so these are not young children. These are full-grown men. Esau has a family of his own. There's a lot going on here. Larry? Mm-hmm.
And so they put it up for lots, and get choice. Yet it seems to me that God's choice was not waited for. I think God has other choice.
That's interesting. Paul does, and Paul certainly is. That you get yourself into. Right, and you get yourself into how many apostles. So Matthias is the one who ends up getting chosen out of the apostles, filling in Judas's spot. It's interesting, which is not to, I don't know that I want to take a position right now because I haven't studied it enough to have a good opinion, but I'm not sure whether that was right or wrong. But I will say it's interesting. Matthias, I think he gets mentioned one more time in Scripture. He is not at the center of events through the rest, which doesn't necessarily make that a right or a wrong decision. But sometimes we're in a rush, and I think that's where you're going with this, Larry. Sometimes we're in a rush to, God, it's my timetable, and God's timetable is often not ours. Steve? Yeah, so hang on to that thought. So that's definitely, Isaac and Rebekah both think they're helping God out here. And so let's keep moving along here a little bit. This is all great, but I want to get a little further, and we have to end a few minutes early tonight. So Rebekah sets up this counterplot. She brings Jacob into that. There's an argument to be made here, and I would say it often does get made. You will find commentators who will argue that Jacob deserves the blessing. Not only has God already made it clear what his choice in the matter is. From their time in the womb, God has selected Jacob, or at least he's made it known to them. I would argue he selected Jacob in eternity past. But certainly from their time in the womb, Isaac and Rebekah have known that Jacob is the heir to the promises of Abraham and Isaac. Not only that, Jacob bought the birthright. By whatever means he acquired it, he now has the birthright and all the rights and privileges and prerogatives of the firstborn, which means he's entitled to the blessing of the firstborn. So there's a strong case that he deserves the blessing of Isaac in this matter. But here's where I want to stick a pin in that. It is never the right thing to do the wrong thing, to do the right thing. Even if, and I think there's a strong case to be made, that Jacob deserves the blessing, and Isaac is trying to subvert God's plan here, which he can't do, by the way. But even if that's what you feel like is going on, and I think that probably is what's happening here, that does not make it okay to resort to deception and sin in order to try and accomplish God's purposes. There is a case to be made here that Jacob and Rebekah feel like Jacob is being shut out, and if they don't do something, God's plan is going to be thwarted. You know, the guy who I always look at when you're talking about this issue is David. David's a lad of 15, 16, maybe 17 when he gets anointed king in Israel. Shortly after that, he has his interaction with Goliath, and he comes to Saul's notice, and he plays his harp in Saul's court. And not long after that, Saul takes a dislike to him. And from then until his 40th birthday, David's on the run. Anointed king in Israel, but on the run. And what's David's response at every single opportunity that comes his way to take Saul's life and hurry events along? Far be it from me to put my hand against the Lord's anointed. I think that's a huge piece of why God looks at David and says, David, a man who has a lot of defects, is a man after God's own heart. Because David looks at that, he says, you know what? God said he's going to do it. In God's timing, he's going to do it. God's not going to mess it up. So I'm going to let it be God's way, and I'm going to do the right thing today, even if I don't know how he's hiding in the wilderness. At one point, David is so low that he goes to the Philistines, where he's not exactly popular, and froths at the mouth and pretends to be insane in order to not be put to death by the Philistines, because he's hiding from Saul and he's not safe in Israel, but he's not safe in Philistia either, because he's not popular. He's killed a lot of Philistines at this point. And he continues to kill a lot of Philistines. Right. That's a dangerous game. That's a moment in David's life where there's a real temptation to say, God, look at all the wicked things Saul is doing. Surely it's time to put an end to that wickedness, and I'll take the throne. After all, I'm already anointed king in Israel. There's a real temptation to help God out in his plans, and David resists that. That's the exact opposite of what happens here. Jacob and Rebekah see a moment when they say, you know what, God's plans need a nudge along, and not even just trying to help God out, they dive right into scheming and conniving in order to try and make things happen in their time. Yeah.
And where would I have been back there if I didn't have all this? Because this is...
And I don't disagree with that a bit. They certainly are hindered by not having the whole counsel of God. I would argue that as you read through one of the so there's this interesting debate about Genesis in particular, where scholars will come along and say, well, Genesis wasn't written by Moses when the Bible says it was written by Moses. You can tell by the structure of the stories and everything that a lot of these were oral traditions that were passed along. Well, I have a real problem with that because God says Moses wrote it. That ends it for me. But I would point out, and I think most likely what happened, those are not mutually exclusive. I think all of these stories, I almost don't like to use the word stories, all of these accounts, these narratives, I think they were oral traditions that were passed along. Now, obviously, when Moses penned them, God helped him get them right, which is why we have some of the details that there's no way those survived as part of an oral tradition. There's no way some of those get kept. I mean, you look a little bit longer, Judah and Tamar, that gets dropped from the oral tradition at some point down through the years. You don't keep that around in the family history. So they may not have had the whole counsel of God, but they certainly knew what God's interactions with Adam and Eve and Noah and down to Abraham and their own personal lives were. And so they knew what they were doing was wrong. Tim? Yeah. Yeah. Right. He's concerned about it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Right?
And we're not often, sometimes we find ourselves in the same situation.
You,
We know what God wants us to do, and am I going to trust Him? Even though it goes against everything everybody else might be telling me to do? Does it make sense for me to do this? But I'm going to trust God and do it anyway. I mean, it really boils down to trust and believing God is a sovereign God.
right. Our definition of faith. God is who he says he is, and he's going to do what he says he's going to do. You either believe that or you don't. And in this moment, Rebekah and Jacob choose to not believe that God's going to fulfill his promises on his own. And rather than seeking some means of helping him, which he doesn't need their help anyway, that's acceptable, they resort instantly to deception. And the smoothness and quickness with which that happens makes me think this isn't the first time. This has been a pattern in their lives up until now, and it happens almost without a thought because it's been a pattern. Jim? Yep, so David was anointed to be the next king when he was 17, but Saul continues to be the king until his death 20-some years later. By Samuel. Yep. By the prophet Samuel on behalf of God. So you have the whole interaction in the beginning of 1 Samuel where Samuel goes to Jesse's house and looks at the eldest son and says, surely the next king is before me, because he's a big strapping lad. He looks kingly. And he goes down through all of Jesse's sons and gets to the end, and the Spirit of God says, nope, it's none of those. And so Samuel says to Jesse, well, there must be at least one, there must be more. And Jesse's response is, well, yeah, there's a lad out in the field tending the sheep. Right, and so David gets brought in, and he ends up being the one. And God gives that famous statement that man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. And the rest is history. All right, so Jacob and Rebekah here, they dive into this deception, and I just want to bear in mind that they start off here planning to deceive. And so they set up their plot. They're going to kill a couple of kids of the goats and deceive Jacob. Verse 10, then you shall take it to your father that he may eat of it and that he may bless you before his death. Verse 11, again, I just can't get over all of these indications. This is a pattern. Verse 11 picks up, and Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, look, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be a deceiver to him, and I shall bring a curse on myself and not a blessing. But his mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice, and go get them for me. And he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory meat such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the choice clothes of her son Esau, which are with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the kids of the goats on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. And then she gave the savory food and bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. And so it's worth noting here, Jacob's objections, sometimes he gets a little bit of credit for the objections here. Jacob's objections are strictly on the grounds of the feasibility of the plan. There is no moral objection here. There's strictly a, what if I get caught? Is this plan going to work, or is there a better plan out there? He does not object to the idea of deceiving his father. He objects to the idea of, okay, so I'm going to, like he's working it through in his head, so I'm going to take the food, I'm going to take it in. Well, what happens if Dad reaches out his arm and puts his hand on my arm? Because Esau's arm and my arm don't feel the same. Then I love the way he phrases it. What if I seem like a deceiver to him? Yeah. You mean like you'll be a deceiver to him? Right. Right. In his own mind, he's playing this out. Yeah. But then I'm going to look like I'm lying to him. Yeah. Because you're going to be lying to him. Flashing neon sign that you're going down the wrong path. If I get caught, I'm going to look like I'm lying, because I am lying. So he continues down this. He and Rebekah strategize. He's concerned that he's going to get a curse and not a blessing. And his mother, verse 13, she's got this opportunity to say, no, you're right. This isn't worth it. No, let the curse be on me instead. I'll take all the consequences. You just do what I said. And she makes every preparation. Again, this idea that this is a habit in their lives. They've planned something like this before. They're anticipating the potential downfalls, the pitfalls, and they're planning for them. Here, I'm going to put some skin of the kids on your arms and on the back of your neck, and then you'll feel like Esau. Just a little caveat in here. What's that tell you about Esau? If you can take goat skin and put it on your arms, and if Dad reaches out and touches you, that's going to convince him you're Esau. Whew. Right, like, Esau is not just a little bit of a hairy guy. Like, goat hair is bristly, it's rough, it's rugged. Esau is a hairy guy. Right? And how scrawny Jacob must have been. Jacob, like, he puts this on him. He dresses up. Rebekah's thinking about, well, you know, Isaac might notice that you don't smell like Esau, so here, put some of Esau's clothes on, then it'll be his clothes, and you'll smell like Esau smells, and you'll feel like Esau feels. And now she prepares it and sends Jacob in order to take the blessing. All in this sordid tale of deceit, and it speaks of past crimes of this nature that had taught both of them how to handle the situation. Verse 18, so he went to his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" And Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done just as you told me. Please arise, sit and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." But Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?" And he said, "Because the Lord your God brought it to me." Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come near that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not." So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother's Esau's hands. So he blessed him. Then he said, "Are you really my son Esau?" He said, "I am." He said, "Bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's game, so that my soul may bless you." So he brought it near to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. We're going to pause there for a second. Jacob comes to Isaac with his savory meat and Esau's robes, and the tangible lies of deception, or the tangle of lies and deception only grow. He's got the kid skin on the back of his hands, and Jacob gets several opportunities here to realize this is a bad idea and bail out. But just the sheer brazenness of this is amazing. Verse 18, "Here I am, my father." What's Isaac's question? "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Opportunity to tell the truth. "Oh, I'm Esau." Dives right in. Verse 20. "How is it that you have found it so quickly? I sent you out to go hunting. That's got to be the fastest hunt in history." And, you know, there's not only, he's going out hunting, but remember, Isaac has a very substantial encampment. Wildlife doesn't like hanging around a substantial encampment. There would have been a zone around their encampment where most of the wildlife wouldn't have come on a regular basis because there's too many people, there's too many domestic animals, there's too much going on. They want to keep a little bit of distance. And so at the very least, Esau here would have had to leave the camp and get a little ways out from the camp before he's got any chance at seeing anything at all. And so in Isaac's mind, the question is, boy, you barely had time to walk to the edge of the camp, see something, shoot it, bring it back. And that was fast. What's Jacob's response? "The Lord your God brought it to me." What a brazen lie. Yeah. Oh, he's attributing to God things that God didn't do, and he knows very well God didn't do. in order to hide his own deception. Not only that, Isaac says to him, "Come here, my son, that I may feel you." Again, an opportunity to back out and to make a change in direction, and Jacob just leans into it. You begin to get an understanding why he's called the heel catcher. He's the deceiver. He's the one who's always looking for an angle. He brazens it out. He leans into it, and he comes close. Isaac feels his arms. He says that the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. Again, that's a commentary on a guy. Goat hair feels like Esau's hands. Is what it is. And so he recognizes it, and he smells him. "Surely the smell of my son is like a field." He'll say a little bit later on, he smells Esau's clothes and smells it. And then finally, verse 24, then he said, again, Isaac is struggling with this. He's not sure. Verse 24, "Are you really my son Esau?" Jacob just brazens the whole thing out. I am. "Yep, Dad, it's me, Esau." He is confident that his father can't see him well enough to tell the difference, and he's determined to stick this out. Verse 25, Isaac says, "Bring it near to me then, and I will eat of my son's game so that my soul may bless you." So he brought it near to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. Verse 26, then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near now and kiss me, my son." And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his clothing and blessed him and said, "Surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone that curses you, and blessed be those who bless you." Upon eating and hugging and kissing his son, Isaac then proceeds to bless the son whom he believes is Esau. And there's a couple of important things I want to note here. We'll wrap up with this section tonight. Notice he believes he's blessing Esau, but knowing what Isaac knows about what God has said should happen, listen to the blessing. Start in verse 28. "Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren." What's the promise God gave Rebekah when Jacob and Esau are in the womb? "The older shall serve the younger." Isaac is deliberately attempting to pass the blessing not on to Jacob, where God said it should go, not to the son who now owns the birthright by whatever means he got it, but on to Esau. And not just his personal blessing. Look at the end of verse 29 there. "Be master over your brethren, let your mother's sons bow down to you." This phrase should scream to us. We should recognize this instantly. The last phrase of verse 29. "Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you." That's been part of God's covenant promise to Abraham and Isaac multiple times now. We are, but this is not God commanding what Jacob or Esau are supposed to do. This is God saying, "Those who stand against my people, I will deal with. And those who bless my people, I will bless." And so God is here promising that he will mete out justice and blessing. But that phrase is crucial here, because this is not just Isaac's blessing. This isn't just Isaac saying, I wish you the best, my son. This is Isaac trying to pass down the Abrahamic covenant, not to Jacob, but to Esau. And as he seeks to do that, again, I always say, Isaac and Rebekah seem to have gotten it into their heads that this is almost magic we say the right words, if we go through the right rituals, we can control this process. That's simply not true. God is the one who selected his people. God is the one who chose the covenant line. God is the one who picked Abraham, not because of anything good Abraham had done, but simply because he chose him. God is the one who promised Abraham to build a great nation out of him when Abraham had no son. God is the one who looks at Jacob and Esau before they're born. Paul makes it utterly clear, before they've ever done anything, before they're conceived, and chooses the younger to be the son who's the son of promise, and that the older would be supplanted by him. That's God's choices. He is the one who makes that decision. And over again, he makes this point endlessly to the nation of Israel. You go read the prophets later on. This is a common theme. God will come back to the nation of Israel in the words of the prophets down to the years of their history and say, hey, I didn't choose you because you were a great nation, but I set my love upon you all the same, and I'm going to accomplish my purpose in you. I'm going to fulfill my word. I'm going to be faithful to the things that I've promised, not because of anything you've done, but because of who I am. Over and over that theme comes up. Sometimes that's a charge on Israel that, look, I'm going to accomplish my purpose. You guys are going to go into judgment now because you've rebelled against me, but I'm still going to accomplish my purpose in spite of that. Sometimes that's a promise of comfort. Hey, you're in the middle of judgment now, but I didn't pick you because you were a faithful nation. I picked you because I'm a faithful God. And so I'm going to bring you back, and I will restore you. You know, one of the great realities of the nation of Israel, there is coming a day when Israel will be restored. There is coming a day, not just restored, but when every promise that God ever made to the nation of Israel, that they will be the center of the world. Commerce, power, authority is going to flow from Jerusalem. There is coming a day, and it's not because of anything Israel has done. It's not because they're a great and powerful nation. It's not because they're going to resurrect some artifact and with the Ark of the Covenant in their midst, they'll win all their battles or something. It's because the God who is a faithful God promised that that would be the case. He promised that they would be his people, the apple of his eye, that he would care for them, that he would bless them, and that one day he would use them to be a blessing to the entire world. He's already done that in a spectacular way, and he's got yet more to come in that regard. And so Isaac and Jacob here, or Isaac and Rebekah here are struggling over this blessing. They think that they're trying to control where this blessing goes. The reality is that God is the one who's in control of that. He's already selected Jacob. Jacob is going to be blessed no matter what happens. That in no way condones what Jacob and Rebekah do here. In fact, I would almost argue that even if things had turned out differently, that Jacob still would have been blessed. If Isaac had somehow given his blessing to Esau, that would not have changed anything with regard to Jacob. Now, I don't think God would have let that happen. One way or another, God was going to work out his good purpose. But that's not the kind of control Isaac has here. He thinks he does, but that's not what he has here. And so all of this strife is worked up because, back to what we were talking about at the beginning, they think they're fixing God's plans. They think they're making it all work out for God, rather than trusting that he's going to accomplish his purpose, rather than putting their faith in the fact that he is a faithful God who's going to do what he said he would do. We're going to, sorry, Larry?
When you come about in the final analysis, sometimes God
Absolutely. Okay. You know, we as humans, we have this very time-bound perspective on life. We see everything in the moment. One of the most stunning revelations occurred to me at one point. I'm a little bit of a programmer, so one of the things that we talk about in engineering world is the right distance for a screen to be at optimal resolution. So this screen, at about arm's length, is the ideal size to capture your vision. It fills your vision. It takes up your attention. Now, if you made that 6 feet away from you, it's tiny. It's not enough. Does that distance change the size of the screen? It's all about perception. And so you actually, this has gotten to be such a thing, you find this on the boxes. If you go to Walmart and you look at the boxes for the TVs, most of them will tell you how far away from your couch it should be to be the optimal distance to capture your vision. And it dawned on me one day, that's the problem we have with events in our lives. We see the stuff that's right in front of us and think it's huge. And a lot of times you get a year or two down the road and you realize that wasn't as big of a deal as I thought it was. God is working out his good purpose. We get caught up in the moment and we deal with the struggles we're in the middle of right now, and they feel like they're so massive and overwhelming, and they just capture our attention. But we need to come back to a right understanding that God is in control. He is sovereign in all of these things in our life, and he is working out his good purpose in us for our good, which doesn't necessarily mean our enjoyment. It means our conformity to the image of Christ, but for our good and for his glory. In Israel? Yeah. Yeah, and actually we're going to thank you for that, Jim, because we're going to segue here. Let's go ahead and we'll pause the screen, and we want to pray for them tonight.
I asked Ben to stop a little early